If you're interested in historical novels that explore the challenges and the pressures that come from the Civil War, especially on families that are already disadvantaged or have some kind of issue that is stopping them from fully reintegrating into society, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I will be reviewing Night Watch by Jayne Anne Phillips. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan. Let me give you a quick synopsis. I'm going to read this straight from Goodreads simply because it's a kind of a complicated narrative, and I think the Goodreads narrative is about as good as I'm going to get, and then I will give you my own personal reflections. This is what it says. In 1874, in the wake of the war, erasure, trauma, and namelessness haunt civilians and veterans, renegades and wanderers, freedmen and runaways. 12-year-old Connolly, the adult of her family for as long as she can remember, finds herself on a buckboard journey with her mother, Eliza, who hasn't spoken in more than a year. They arrive at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia, delivered to the hospital's entrance by a war veteran who has forced himself into their world. There, far from family, a beloved neighbor, and the mountain home they knew, they try to reclaim their lives. The omnipresent vagaries of war and race rise to the surface as we learn their flight to the highest mountain ridges of Western Virginia, the disappearance of Connolly's father, who left for the war and never returned. Meanwhile, in the asylum, they begin to find a new path. Connolly pretends to be her mother's maid. Eliza responds slowly to treatment. They get swept up in the life of the facility, and the mysterious man they call the Night Watch, the orphan child called Weed, the fearsome woman who runs the kitchen, and the remarkable doctor at the head of the institution. This book won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I've read the other two books that were finalists, and I found this one to be a much more distinct from the other two, primarily because this is a historical book that doesn't deal with the questions of identity in quite the same way that the other two do. Those have a question of particularly Asian American identity and how people should fit into a society when they feel like they're living in two worlds. This one, you could also say that it definitely approaches the question of identity, but in a very different manner, especially since you have so many characters in it that are pretending to be people that they aren't, or they are trying to misrepresent themselves to the hospital, to the asylum, and to society to try and protect themselves. I would say that that's probably a bigger theme that you would be exploring in this. I would say from the get-go, this book in some ways is easier to follow than the other two finalists. It's also told in a non-linear way. There are definitely moments of great confusion about who exactly you're talking about. You do jump around a fair amount. There are a great deal of characters that you need to know about, although by and large, the most important person that you do need to know about is, of course, Connolly, and that great question of what happened to their father and their mother. Why is the mother gone mute? And this whole recovery process. There is this element the whole time as you're reading it of the mother slowly improving, but a bit of curiosity of, is it a good kind of improvement, or is this a bit contrived? Is this improvement that is, really only a product of where they're at and a little bit of disillusionment being involved? And that's a big part of this novel, is exploring this idea of disillusionment and how much that is contributing to people trying to recover, especially after the Civil War, when so many people had their lives changed fundamentally in so many different ways, whether it's from injury, whether they lost a spouse, whether they, of course, at the end of the Civil War, you have all sorts of questions just about restructuring society. So all of these things are going to play a role in this book. Now, the setting is very interesting, putting it in this asylum, because I think they deliberately put it in West Virginia, the mountain state, and there is absolutely this sense of seclusion that plays a big part of helping them to recover and helping them to really express themselves and to explore what all has happened. All of that makes this kind of a challenging read, so I could certainly see why some people might not be fully interested in taking on a book of this manner, especially since I characterized it as being in the wake of the Civil War. And if you consider yourself a Civil War book, you're not going to find much in this that I think you care for. I mean, there's not going to be lots of battles or anything. Instead, you're dealing much more with the fragility of social relationships, and especially the fragility of people's psyches as their world is being very challenged by everything that's going on around them. I would also say a big theme of this is seeking assistance and seeking help and finding that help. I do think there's a bit of a question of how much of the help is as productive as you would like it to be, or as attached to reality as you think it might be. But regardless, you are certainly seeing people's improvement. And by the end of the novel, I would not say that this is a necessarily a happy ending, but I would certainly say that there is a sense of improvement, or at the very least, a sense of community that is helping to foster, if not improvement, at least ongoing stability. So I would say that that is the prime theme that you're exploring through this as you consider just how disruptive the Civil War was. Who would I say this is for? Well, people that read Pulitzer Prize-winning books. This is not going to be for most people. Bottom line is that this is for someone that is going to read this because some other bibliophile of theirs told them that this was an award-winning book and that they are ready to engage with all the different types of emotions and deal with the fact that it's not going to be a simple, neat, tidy storyline, and you should be much more interested in getting to know the various characters and less interested in a traditional narrative of, a second act climactic point and a third act resolution. That is not exactly what you should be expecting from this book. I will say that the prose and the dialogue are absolutely fascinating, and so those are the types of things that I think get the attention of the various prize awarding committees, especially the Pulitzer Prizes. I think that this is a book that someone could enjoy as long as they're prepared for all the challenges that come with reading a book that's this rich in emotion and is this committed to exploring a pretty dysfunctional moment in not just American history, but of course in the history of this particular family's life. Who wouldn't I say this is for? Most people. I don't think that this is a book that is going to interest your casual reader. I do think of the 3 books that were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in fiction, this is probably the easiest one to read in some respects. The other 2 I found much more experimental, and so the fact that this one's not quite as experimental, even though it does not have that direct linear storyline, I do still think that this is by and large going to be an easier read in that respect. Although you do have much more you have to deal with in terms of the dialogue and the vernacular that's being used, but it's not too extreme. I would certainly say this is not for people that are coming here because they consider themselves some kind of Civil War buff. You're not going to find that in here in the way that you're hoping. There's definitely not going to be big battle scenes. This is definitely much more an exploration of the lasting impact on the families. It, of course, takes place nearly a decade after the end of Civil War. That's meant to show just how long a recovery for something like this can be. Of course, I'd love to know what you guys think about this book. Of course, what you think about the other books that were finalists for the Pulitzer Prize in fiction, or any other book of this nature, this historical fiction that is, of course, trying to dive into some kind of national tragedy. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.